Lincoln and the Constitution, Part 3. John Merryman was arrested for allegedly planning to blow up a bridge in Maryland that would prevent troops from coming to protect Washington, D.C. during the secession crisis. Merryman was arrested under President Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus. And so Merryman was incarcerated without trial. The Lincoln administration chose not to bring Merryman to trial because they were afraid that a Maryland jury would have Southern sympathizers and would not convict Merryman. And so Merryman was simply arrested, held in prison without charges or trial until the secession crisis was over, and then he was simply released. While Merryman was incarcerated, he brought his case to the Federal Circuit Court for Maryland, demanding release from prison. And the judge was the Chief Justice of the United States, Roger B. Taney. Taney agreed with Merryman and declared Lincoln's suspension of the writ of habeas corpus to be unconstitutional. Taney ordered Merryman's release from prison, the argument being that only Congress, not the President, has the power to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. And what did President Lincoln do? He just flat out ignored Taney. Well, that's pretty serious business for the President of the United States to ignore a federal court order from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Why was Lincoln able to get away with that? Because Chief Justice Taney blew his credibility with the American people in the Dred Scott decision. Anyway, though, the interesting point here is that Lincoln may well have been right on the law, that the president can suspend the writ of habeas corpus in certain situations, and Taney may have been wrong on the law. This is still a gray area today. The Supreme Court has never definitively ruled on this matter one way or the other. The issue has never been definitively resolved by a Supreme Court case. And so it's still unclear, still a gray area today, whether the president can suspend habeas corpus. Instead, what happened is that Congress stepped in and retroactively sustained Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus, as Congress had sustained Lincoln's other encroachments on congressional prerogatives. So Congress passed the Habeas Corpus Act of 1863, which sustained the president's suspension of habeas corpus, endorsed it, and since Congress clearly has the power to suspend habeas corpus, that settled the matter. Once Congress sustained Lincoln's actions, it became a moot point. When Congress okayed the suspension, that resolved the issue. And so again, Lincoln went way out on a limb here, and Congress could have sawed off the limb, but Congress chose not to. Instead, Congress sustained the president and sided with Lincoln and against Taney. And so in the end, you have two branches of the federal government, the president and Congress, against one federal judge. Now, in evaluating the constitutionality of Lincoln's actions, we need to consider one more argument that Lincoln himself made. Lincoln asked the question, are all the laws but one to go unenforced in order to enforce one law? Or should he violate one law to save the whole Constitution? In other words, what if you have to choose the lesser of two evils? Do you violate one law to save the whole Constitution from going down in flames? Or do you scrupulously observe every part of the Constitution and then watch the whole thing crash and burn? Now, to make his point, Lincoln did what he always did. He used a simple, folksy analogy. Lincoln compared himself to a medical doctor. A medical doctor never, ever, ever amputates a limb, unless you do it to save a life. It's the same with the Constitution. The president never, ever, ever breaks the law, unless he breaks one law to save the entire Constitution. Now, when Lincoln made that analogy, his opponents jumped all over him. He just admitted that he broke the law. We've got him. But Lincoln never admitted that he broke the law. He never conceded that point. What Lincoln was saying is, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? To conclude, I don't think that you can call Lincoln a dictator during the Civil War. Instead, I think he brilliantly walked a tightrope. Lincoln walked a tightrope between vigorous but legitimate presidential power on the one hand, and a usurpation of presidential power on the other. That is, tyranny, dictatorship. That was not an easy tightrope to walk in the context of rebellion and civil war. It required incredibly sound judgment to do what Lincoln did. It required a level of judgment that Lincoln had, but many of his contemporaries lacked. I think Lincoln compares really well to his contemporaries. On the one extreme, you have Ambrose Burnside, who clearly trashes the Constitution to save the Constitution. At the other extreme, you have Chief Justice Taney or President Buchanan, who won't lift a finger to save the Union and stop secession. President Buchanan, for example, his official position was secession is illegal, but there's not a darn thing the president can do to stop it. Oh well. In the middle of the spectrum, you have Lincoln, taking the power of the presidency to the very limit to save the Union. Lincoln acted vigorously, but constitutionally. He wasn't perfect, but he got it right most of the time. He got it right most of the time, and he did so under the most trying of circumstances. Lincoln did not place himself above the law in a time of national crisis. Instead, he acted in good faith within the law. I'm not sure anybody else could have done it any better. And so Lincoln compares really good to his contemporaries, Burnside, Taney, Buchanan. I think he also compares very well to other American presidents at different points in time. 60 years before the Civil War, John Adams signed the Sedition Act, making it a crime to criticize the government, a clear violation of the First Amendment. 60 years after the Civil War, President Woodrow Wilson signed a Sedition Act. But Lincoln, during the Civil War, under worse circumstances than Adams or Wilson faced, never asked for, and I don't believe would have signed, a Sedition Act. And again, Lincoln faced a worse domestic crisis than Adams or Wilson faced. Why was Lincoln so careful and scrupulous in enforcing the law and upholding the Constitution? I think Lincoln was a thoughtful, nuanced lawyer with a brilliant legal and constitutional mind. Also, let's not forget the Republican Party slogan: free soil, free labor, free speech, and free men. And why was freedom of speech so important to the Republican Party? Well, remember the beating of Charles Sumner. And one more thing to keep in mind. Remember what Lincoln was doing in the previous war, the Mexican War. Lincoln was the one in the Mexican War who was opposed to the war and exercised his First Amendment freedoms, free speech, in opposing the war. Well, now, when Lincoln himself is president and the shoe is on the other foot, I think he remembered and respected what it was like to be an opponent of war.